Sophie.
You don't have to yell, Mookie. I can hear you just fine.
Sophie, why are we here today?
We're here because I was on Blue Sky and someone started a thread there that was basically, what's the most disappointed you've ever been in a video game?
Aww.
So it wasn't like, what's the worst game ever made or what's a game you hate? It was like, what's a game that, like, this is almost really good, but they made like one or two decisions that just kind of sink the whole enterprise, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I was thinking through in my head, like, you know, what games does that apply to? Because I don't play very many AAA games. So people were bringing up things like Overwatch 2 and Deathloop and stuff that I've never played, right? The first thing I thought to myself was, I'm not going to say Zardion.
And we actually have a whole episode where we talk about that.
I'm just assuming everyone knows Zardion. That's how important it is to me.
It's an integral part of our lives.
Yeah. So, like, Zardion is a game that, like, no matter what they did, it was never going to work because their reach just so massively exceeded their grasp that it was a doomed enterprise from the beginning. It's like a fucking Werner Herzog film. Zardion is the true burden of dreams. So then I suddenly remembered Deep Fear. So Deep Fear is another game that it has a pretty incredible pedigree that I'd say is about on par with Zardion in terms of who's involved. And it also doesn't quite work. But the reasons it doesn't quite work are things they could actually have addressed and still made the game. Deep Fear is supposed to be the Sega Saturn's answer to Resident Evil. It is a very obviously Resident Evil influenced third-person survival horror game. It's got the tank control setup. It's polygon characters against pre-rendered backdrops. Plays very similarly, kind of looks very similar, but it didn't quite take off. Sin, why don't you think this worked?
For me, what didn't work in this game are the tank controls, as they're a little hard to navigate, which makes this experience a little tedious at times. The backtracking was a little bit annoying. Now, otherwise, for me personally, I love the rest of the game. I think it's beautiful. I love the art direction. The graphics are great. It looks smooth. There's character development. There's mystery. The voice acting and the dialogue, I think, may be a polarizing topic. But I thought every time the characters opened their mouth, it was like a masterpiece.
There's no problem with my CFOX system. No accident should have occurred. Ooh!
I would describe the voice acting as memorable.
Memorable, yes! Memorable, very memorable. And I was excited to hear, like, what else are you gonna say? And how are you gonna say it?
What else are we gonna say?
What else are we gonna say?
Alright, so the tank controls, right? This game came out in 1998. So it's actually really late in the Saturn's life cycle, and in Europe, this was the last Saturn game released.
Oh.
So the Saturn actually had an analog stick controller that you could play the game with. And it also had, unlike Resident Evil, the ability to aim and shoot while you were moving. So overall, like, it is a much faster and more fluid combat system than Resident Evil has, even though it's clearly, like, deriving itself from that. It's also a survival horror game that just gives you so many guns and so much ammunition and so many healing items that the whole notion of survival horror being about inventory management isn't really part of the experience. Like, this is a game where you can just carry like 15 medikits around with you and it doesn't matter. But what it does in place of that is it makes you manage oxygen. This is the best idea that the game has, and it absolutely fucks it up.
Oh.
So Deep Fear is set underwater. None of this game takes place on the surface. You're confined solely to underwater structures that have a limited amount of oxygen in them. So your oxygen meter is always ticking down. So you have this timer that is over your head that is, if this gets to 0, you will just suffocate, right? And this interacts in a really interesting way with the game giving you just a ton of ammunition and guns right from the start. Because every time you fire one of those guns, the little bang flash that happens is, of course, combustion, which means that every time you fire the gun, you're burning up a little bit of the oxygen in the room. So what the game is doing is, it's giving you this kind of arsenal, and it's putting a bunch of monsters in your way, and then it's saying, like, yeah, you can shoot them, but the process of trying to shoot them might actually lead to you suffocating.
No, I really like that because it's like a layered mechanic. I think when you walk into a room, there's an oxygen kind of counter. When that runs out, you have like an oxygen bar that can run out. And then when that runs out, I think your health starts running out. So it's like, it's stressful.
Well, this is the thing. You've kind of zeroed in on what the problem is. Which is that you have a little too much oxygen. Like, every room's got a little individual oxygen level. When that runs out, instead of actually suffocating, our hero just pulls out a respirator and puts that on, and he breathes through the respirator, which has an incredibly long oxygen bar attached to it.
Yeah, I like that. I'm like, phew, at least I don't have to be anxious all the time.
The problem, though, is that you'll notice the title of the game is Deep Fear.
Yeah.
And you seem to be praising the game for the fact it wasn't that scary.
You know what I think? I think you're right, because it wasn't... The atmosphere wasn't very scary. The monsters were cool. Like, they were really great looking, but they weren't scary. There was some gore in it. Like, at some point, I don't know if you remember, a character started to transforming and their nails pop up, and then there's like blood. So it was very gory, but it was more like a little more fun, you know, than like, ooh, scary. Yeah.
Yeah. So on top of the way that the oxygen supply running out doesn't really hurt you, the game also gives you 2 different ways to get oxygen back. The first of which is a thing called an air grenade. When you throw it, it just goes off and lets a bunch of oxygen into the room. So if you're running low on oxygen, just throw an air grenade and it comes back again. Quite a lot of the rooms have these kind of, they're called these like air regulator module things stuck to the walls, right? Interacting with one of those just refills the air in the room and also refills your respirator. And that's why it stuck out to me as like a disappointing game. Because I feel like had the oxygen mechanic been rebalanced to make it something that was like genuinely hanging over your head the whole time, like there was this constant fear of suffocation, and had they actually created situations kind of like the ones in Resident Evil where you were trying to size up whether or not to engage with something because there was a downside to it, like you've played Resident Evil.
Yeah.
So that's a game where like you run into situations where like, all right, there's some zombies in front of me. I could just decapitate them, but then I'm 2 shotgun shells short and I don't know what's around the corner. So you start trying to manage like that very limited supply of ammunition, that very limited supply of healing that you've got. Deep Fear almost gets to a point where it's creating a similar kind of dilemma for you, where instead of it being, am I going to waste ammunition getting through this line of enemies, it becomes, I don't care if I run out of ammunition, but the act of getting past these enemies might actually suffocate me, so is there another way? But then, like I said, you just have so much oxygen. It just never actually matters. So I think we should now talk about like maybe some other parts of Deep Fear.
Okay.
So Deep Fear is kind of well known for having really weird and bad voice acting.
Danny, maybe you should seal off the area.
Well, I took care of the monster.
Maybe you caught pressure psychosis.
That's
Dr.
what I think.
Weisberg.
I'll go to Commander Clancy's room.
A lot of the coverage you will see of Deep Fear is just kind of people making fun of the cutscenes.
Yeah.
Sen, what did you think of the voice acting in Deep Fear?
Well, like you said, it was memorable, and I actually really appreciate it because it was different from what you see every day.
Come on, Sharon. Let's go back to land together.
When you get back,
What?
would you have an ice cream with me?
Of course.
So Deep Fear got kind of a polarized reception where the Japanese reviews were kind of okay. The English reviews sort of weren't. And one of the problems the English reviews brought up was the voice acting. And you might think, oh, I guess in Japan they had a Japanese language track that was done better than this. And they didn't. The voice acting that you hear in the English dub of Deep Fear is the only voice acting anyone got. It's, again, it's the same thing that Resident Evil did, and it's the same thing that later on, like, Dark Souls would do, where for aesthetic reasons, to create a kind of feel to it, it's supposed to feel like an American action movie. All the characters were speaking English regardless of the region you were playing it in. And like Resident Evil, the English-speaking world kind of maybe wasn't the primary audience, so they didn't really care how they sounded. Yeah, so a lot of the cast of this, they're people who, like, their careers are doing English voices in media that's only designed to be seen in Japan. So if you look at, like, the credits of, like, the guy who voices your wacky sidekick Mookie, he's just a guy who's, like, the American guy in a Japanese movie. So his actual ability to act is kind of, like, subordinate to that.
Okay, Mookie, let's slide on into home.
One weird thing I noticed is that a lot of the actors in this sound Australian.
Ah.
Everyone's dead from the strange disease. Hell, I might have caught it too.
This is weirdly common for the time. If people are familiar with the Mega Man dubs that Capcom was doing, there's a lot of Australian actors in those.
I'll take care of this personally.
By yourself, Commander?
There is also, interestingly, a Deep Fear audio drama that is official. But
Oh my God.
it's entirely voiced in Japanese.
Oh.
And it's also impossible to find. So no one's uploaded it anywhere. So I'm assuming they did a better job.
Well, we'll know.
But, like,
Maybe it sounds great to us because we don't speak Japanese, right?
that's possible. So we have this dub that is completely bizarre sounding, and then that is paired with some very, very awkward late 90s CG animation. And when it's just doing, like, parts of the big table breaking down, when it's doing, like, you know, things blowing up, things landing in the ocean, it's absolutely fine. But it cannot do people. Like, the humans in the CG cutscenes, they actually look more awkward than the in-game models, because the in-game models have so little detail to them that you can kind of fill in the blanks in your head, whereas the CG versions are in this weird uncanny valley place. So when you combine that with the really awkward dub, almost every single scene in Deep Fear just completely falls off a cliff right away. Like, there is a scene that haunts me where one of the characters is throwing the protagonist a set of keys.
Okay.
To open a door, and it's just meant to be, here's the keys, and he throws them. But it looks like something out of, I don't know, like 2001 A Space Odyssey, where it's like this incredibly slow key movement spinning through the air, and then the main character, like, opening his hands out like he's like a baby trying to catch a ball. and and then smushing them together to grab the key and smiling. And it's just so fucking weird to watch.
I like the scene where there was some flirting, attempt at flirting.
Yeah.
You know, when Anna, the sniper, basically saves John's life from a monster. And so he's like, how do I know you're not a monster either, Anna?
Do I look like a monster?
In a way, yes.
Haha, in a way, yes. Like, that's his attempt to flirt with another human. Are we allowed to give story spoilers in this podcast?
I think we are. Okay. So I think before the story, I'll just talk about who actually made this.
Oh, yeah. That's a good idea.
Yeah. So, like I was saying, there's a lot of talent behind Deep Fear. So you mentioned you really like the monster designs.
Yeah.
The monsters were designed by I'd say reasonably well-known manga artist called Yasushi Nirasawa. Nirasawa designed a lot of monsters for Kamen Rider. And like you were saying, like, the monsters in this, like, they don't look like zombies. They look like, what would you say they look like to you?
They reminded me of necromorphs from Dead Space, to be honest, kinda. They're like mutants or something.
Yeah. They're very asymmetrical. They look like a person, but they will have like a massive weird growths and tentacles coming out of one side of their body or something like that. There's also quite a lot of animal-based monsters in this. Like, there's like mutated cows and mutated dogs and mutated mice. And they have, like, to me, they actually look a lot like when Kenner Toys made alien figurines in the 90s. And they just invented, like, this is the bull alien. This is the praying mantis alien. They kind of look like that. And, like, that further differentiates it from Resident Evil, because when Resident Evil starts, it's pretty much just zombies for, I'd say, 80% of the game. Whereas Deep Fear, like, the first thing it does is it hits you with, like, someone whose half of their body is, like, turning into a sea anemone, and it just builds from that.
Yeah, and you know, Yasushi Nirasawa, he was a sculptor and a designer, and he would make, like, his own sculptures, but also he would make stuff that was inspired by, like, Guyver, Hellraiser, and I think it really shows in this game.
Yeah, they look a lot like the Zoonoids from the Guyver. Like, the sort of early stage ones where you can see, like, there's an element of body horror to them. There's, like, a human head hanging off to the side, and the rest is, like, some weird, like, mass of, like, tentacles and, like, transparent sacs and things. But then toward the end, you just get straight up, like one of the recurring enemies who doesn't even, like, take that long to show up is just, like, what if there was a sexy green lady with, like, an armored bikini and, like, praying mantis legs, and that's just an enemy from this point onward. The final boss just looks like a fairy. Like, she doesn't look like a horrible sort of monster. Like it's not terribly disturbing. Like the story itself and where the monsters come from and everything, that itself is quite close to Parasite Eve. But, like, Parasite Eve really, particularly the second one, really leans into, like, mixing human and animal traits to make these weird, like, hybrid-looking creatures. So, like, a horse with a human's face, and it looks like it's really fucking creepy-looking thing. Whereas Deep Fear is just, like, this just looks like the Guyver. Another great part of Deep Fear is the music. So do you know who did the music for this?
Who did the music?
Sin, it's only the composer of your favorite anime of all time.
No!
Mobile Police Patlabor!
Ah, god damn it.
Yeah, the music for Deep Fear is by Kenji Kawai, who, like, he did Patlabor, he also did Ghost in the Shell, and it's that very kind of, like, ethereal sounding music that, like, it fits really, really well with the sort of, like, the undersea feel of this game. It's a really, really good soundtrack that unfortunately is in deep fear.
Sophie, that wasn't very demure of you.
We've also got not like super creatively involved, but working in like a producer role is Reiko Kodama. Again, and someone with an incredible pedigree who worked on like the original Sonic the Hedgehog, who worked on Alex Kidd, who worked on Phantasy Star, who's like Reiko Kodama's responsible for like, if you can think of like a early Sega game that you liked, it was probably Reiko Kodama. She's involved, but like it's not like her, she's not directing it, it's not her story, but like they had her on board. But like the major kind of creative force here is the writer / designer, who's Yuzo Sugano. He later worked on a PS2 game called Extermination that people might have heard of, which is like, again, a very similar kind of, you're this like soldier character who is fighting people who are being possessed and transformed by a weird bacteria. And that is a really interesting game, and it actually has an infection system in it. You can get bitten a lot in Resident Evil and doesn't do anything to you. Whereas Extermination makes a point of like, no, like these things are contagious. If enough of this gets in you, you'll actually turn into a monster and it's the end of the game.
Oh, that's cool.
And yeah, he also supervised Tokyo Jungle. But most importantly,
I know where this is going.
A little indie gem you may have heard of called Bloodborne.
Oh, that's not where I was going.
Where bafflingly, he did quality control.
And this is literally the only good Miyazaki game. So I think...
Yeah, you think he's the special sauce.
Yes. It's so basically we need to get him back and we'll get another gem.
Do you want to talk about like the plot of Deep Fear?
Yeah, why not? Let's do it. And I feel like people should watch till the end, because I have actually discovered a piece of secret hidden lore that nobody else discovered yet.
Oh, okay, well, yeah. I trust you. If anyone else said that, I'd just turn off, but...
Okay. All right, Sophie. Give me the story.
Okay.
Give me the lore.
Okay. So, again, Deep Fear's plot, a lot of people make fun of it for being fucking stupid.
I disagree.
I partially disagree. The thing about Deep Fear's plot is, like, the actual way it is structured and the way that this emergency situation unfolds is, I think, quite well done. It's just that all of the details about this stupid parasite cell thing are so contrived and so bizarre that, like, it's almost like it is two completely different stories that have crashed into each other. The thing is, like, the cast themselves don't seem to be able to take the parasite cell seriously as a concept. So, like, early on in the game, there is a scene where our protagonist notices that, like, a submarine is going out of control.
Mm-hmm.
This is taking place while the base that he is on and everyone in it is overrun by hideous mutated monsters.
Mm-hmm.
And his first thought is...
Nuclear terrorists?
Could this be nuclear terrorists? Because it's like the whole monster thing has just slipped his mind. It is so bizarre.
The first time John encounters a monster, I think he said it to his coworker, like, hey, you saw how that guy turned into a monster?
You saw how that guy turned into a monster?
I know. That was strange. Yes.
That was strange.
Yeah, that's the exact delivery. It's like, and I think your description of it as like a co-worker is perfect, because that's the tone of all the discussions. It's just like, it's like water cooler talk. Like, hey, you know that guy we rescued before? He turned into a sea anemone. That's weird. Anyway.
And then when he has to report it to his superior, like what the problem is. He's like,
there seems to be no major damage. Also, one of the survivors turned into a monster.
Also, one of the survivors turned into a monster. That's it. There's like no urgency. There's no panic. It's just another.
I mean, to be fair, it's probably not. There's probably not a policy. So we'll get on it eventually.
Oh my god, they're so overworked. It's on the list of things to do.
So, like, everything about the parasite cell in Deep Fear is incredibly contrived to the point of just being absolute nonsense, right? But I think the sequence of events and what happens is decent. So,
yeah.
The way this parasite cell works, right? Spoilers for 26-year-old video game Deep Fear, right?
Yeah.
Is that a monkey was sent into space. While it was in space, a Fantastic Four style, it was bombarded with cosmic rays, which caused bacteria in its system to mutate into a new kind of organism called the parasite cell, and that also made the monkey immortal. They study the monkey and they start researching it. So the monkey is kind of patient zero, right, for this weird bacteria thing, which then, as they are researching it, gets out and starts infecting people and transforming them into monsters. So again, it's like a very standard sort of like, similar to Resident Evil kind of setup. Problems with this bacteria. Its weakness is oxygen.
Yeah.
The other thing about the parasite cell is that if you've got any other virus in your system, it can't do anything to you.
Yeah, because John had the flu or something, and he never got infected.
Yeah, the main character of this story has a cold. And having a cold makes him completely immune to the parasite cell.
Yeah.
Further complicating matters.
What's going on?
April Fools! Did you forget it's April Fool's Day?
This game is canonically set on April Fool's Day. Which means that several of the reports made about the monsters are dismissed out of hand. Because people think you're making them up.
Danny, there's a monster. We have to shut off this area.
What was it this time? Another mermaid?
But I think that what you're describing now is also the strength of the story. Because essentially John is somebody who got transferred to this underwater research fueling facility a week ago. And, he's making friends and he's kind of rebuilding his life, because the reason I think he's in that position and not continue being a SEAL Team 6 Marine who has training in decoding nuclear missile launches is because earlier his wife passed away because he took her on a boating trip in the middle of a storm.
Yeah. He decides to leave the Navy and become someone who professionally rescues people from the ocean, which is the one thing he's demonstrated he can't do.
So, thank you, Sophie. So he's rebuilding his life, he's making new friends, and a week into it, this thing breaks out that starts killing all of them, right? So even though this virus won't make it to the surface and won't survive it in the surface, the point is surviving it in the moment and him having to save everybody in the moment on that underwater station. And it's actually quite sad because, spoilers, everybody dies except for him.
And Rambo the dog.
Oh, Rambo the dog is okay. Yeah, there's Rambo the dog who makes it, him and the dolphin.
Go! Or Sharon's life will be wasted.
Yeah, so, and another thing that happens while, this outbreak is there is that another team is called in to help, and the leader of the team is his fiance's brother? Father?
I think, no, it's her father.
It's her father. Yeah, so John has to face the father of the fiance that he kind of killed inadvertently.
Kind of killed inadvertently.
And so that's a whole, psychological issue happening there. And that situation actually gave rise to my favorite cutscene ever created. So John and Colonel McCoy meet, and Colonel McCoy is infected.
No.
Yes, my body is being taken over by a creature.
So he knows he doesn't have much time left. He says, John, I always wanted to give this to you. I was waiting for you and Stella to get married, or since I wanted you to get married. And so at this point, I'm waiting for Colonel McCoy to give him like a pendant or like something emotional, something, maybe a piece of advice. I don't know. And what he throws at John is a Colt.
It's a Colt. M1991A1. It's from my father's generation. The pride of a strong America.
So he's like, it's a Colt. It's an MIT 9181, John. It was my father's generation. The pride of strong America. Go kill a creature for me, John. That was so beautiful.
It's just a very well written, just gun guy who's just obsessed with guns.
It's so in character.
The thing about John's tragic backstory is that he has a photograph of Stella, his dead fiancée, in his cabin. He looks at it and says, her smile never seems to change. And it's like, it's a photograph. What's interesting about the story in comparison to a lot of other survival horror games is that we're actually there as the disaster is unfolding from the beginning.
Right.
If you think about Resident Evil, you're arriving after everything's gone wrong. So the mansion's already gone to shit, there's zombies everywhere, and you're trying to figure out what happened. Deep Fear, you're actually watching the whole thing happen. That game starts before really anything goes wrong.
It's more like a horror movie.
There's actually an escalating series of problems that occur throughout the story. A lot of things actually go wrong with the base that aren't just there's more monsters here. There's a sequence where a Harrier jump jet falls into the ocean. And, there's this potential issue where, that thing's got missiles on board. What will happen now? There's sequences where, the base loses power because something crashes into it. So the other thing about this story is that, there is a pretty clearly defined villain in it. And he's kind of nothing to do with the parasite cell. He's technically in charge of, the project that's released the parasite cell, but...
Because he wanted to study Anthony the chimp. The reason... Do you want to tell us the reason why he really wanted to study Anthony?
Yeah. So this character is... His name is Clancy Dawkins, right?
Yeah.
He is in charge of this facility that you're in, right? And when he talks about being in charge of the facility, he's actually very bitter about it.
Yeah.
Because he keeps saying, I was, destined for great things, and this fucking bureaucrats, they've stuck me on this, stupid underwater prison. I hate working here. I just want to, get out of here and get back to the surface. And he has aspirations. They talk about him going to Washington. So he has these aspirations of, going into politics. And he talks, again, in the usual Deep Fear style of voice acting, in this very casual, just sort of annoyed-sounding way about the whole situation.
But the government looks at one mistake and cuts me off from my dreams by locking me up in this ocean floor prison.
One little tiny mistake.
You make one mistake and they never forget it.
You make one tweet.
And they stick you underwater for the rest of your career. Then John's what happened? And he's like, well...
Oh, one of the submarine missiles I launched hit a passenger ship. And it sunk.
And it then gets worse when it turns out that one of the other crew of the base was the sonar operator when he fired the missile. And he's like, we were warning him not to fire, and he did it anyway.
Yeah. It's kind of like that meme where, the Star Wars meme. So it was an accident, right? It was an accident, right? It's like, no, he did it on purpose.
He has this increasing meltdown as the situation on the base gets worse that climaxes with him leaving everyone behind in this, like, escape submersible.
My life means more than all of you small fish. I can't end my days here. I need to get back at the people in Washington who treated me like a criminal. The survivors. I can't let them live.
And then he complains that people treat him like a criminal. But the thing is, like, that whole character arc, everything he goes through, that could all have happened without the parasite cell. Like, you could just have had, like, the thing crash into the base starts to lose power and oxygen, and he abandons everyone.
The parasite thing, Sophie, it's just a little bonus, you know? You get a little extra for your money.
But it is, because it's literally like, it's like two completely different stories, where one is like this sort of like military claustrophobic thriller.
Yeah.
Where like it's about these characters being trapped in this space together and slowly going mad. But then off to the other side, it's like also, what if there was an immortal monkey who turned people into sea anemones?
Now, Sophie, that leads me to the lore I discovered that nobody else did in the past 26 years. Would you like to hear it?
I'd love to hear it.
So, we know that Johnny, the main character, took his fiancée Stella in his boat on a relaxing trip in the middle of a storm. That doesn't make sense, Sophie. What makes sense is that he did it so he can kill her by throwing her off of the boat, or that she was already dead and he was just disposing of the body.
I see.
Why? Because he was cheating on Stella with Sharon and wanted Stella's insurance money to start a whole new life. Because remember, we found all those love letters from Sharon to Johnny or to herself, or it was her diary, whatever, but it's there. We have physical proof.
Yeah. So the interesting thing about Sharon and John is that they've been working together a week.
Allegedly. Sophie, there's more. So would you agree that at this point, Johnny should face up to what he's did?
Yes.
And so should Sharon, right? That's not all. Because let's look at Clancy Dawkins.
He just made one mistake.
Yeah, and he's stuck there because, he made one mistake where he launched a missile into a passenger ship.
Deliberately.
So he should also be facing justice, right?
Yeah.
So we have people who should be in prison, but instead they're in this underwater facility, which could only mean one thing, Sophie. It's a purgatory.
Okay.
And all the people who are there did something and are now stuck in purgatory.
What about Rambo?
Well, Rambo is like I guess an angel or whatever, and he was sent there to rescue the people who are truly sorry for what they did. And apparently the only person who was sorry is Johnny.
Dawkins clearly isn't sorry.
Dawkins isn't sorry. Sharon is still like, "Ooh, let's go get ice cream together." I'm sure the other people did something wrong.
So we've talked about John Mayer, our heroic protagonist. We've kind of mentioned some other people, but I think we should go into more depth there.
Okay.
So John, the thing about John is, like, canonically, he has been here for 1 week. So his best friend that he met a week ago is Mookie.
I love Mookie. He's so cool.
Mookie's thing is he talks entirely in baseball metaphors.
How's the little shark?
Best conditions. Like the Yankees in 96.
The story actually begins with Mookie playing an April Fool's joke on John by pretending that one of the crew is drowned. Which you shouldn't be doing to someone who's been there a week. The member of the crew who didn't drown is Sharon.
Mm-hmm.
Sharon is madly in love with John, having met him a week ago.
Which lends credence to my theory. It's been more than a week they've known each other. Think about that.
I will. I mean, otherwise it's just bad writing.
Thank you, Sophie.
So Sharon is madly in love with John. And she actually is in cahoots with Mookie to do this April Fool's joke so that John will give her mouth to mouth. Which maybe when they wrote it was supposed to be cute, but just comes across as really fucking creepy.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yep. And John promises her that one day they'll get ice cream, but at that point he knows she's going to die. So
Aww.
I don't know if he believed that. There's Clancy Dawkins, who is a mass murderer. There's Anna.
She's cool. I was upset when they did her wrong. They did her wrong.
Anna has a pet dog called Rambo, and one of my favorite things in the game is like what they choose to animate in CG and what they don't. And they actually allocated some of the budget to making a CG animation of John giving a dog a hamburger.
Yeah, that was so cute. That was the best part of the entire thing.
There's Danny, who is one of the crew, and he is secretly in love with Anna, but he can't bring himself to say anything. They try to make him seem like he's joking around, but again, like, the dialogue and the animation and the delivery just, like, is incredibly awkward.
Leave the area lock up to me, is what I'd like to say, but this is out of gas.
And, very tragically, he is killed by Anna after Anna is possessed by the parasite cell.
Anna, it's the first time you've ever come to me.
Where did John get the cold? Sorry, I've only just thought about this. Sorry. John's been underwater for a week.
Yeah, he brought it with him. It was the end of the cold.
But why don't other people have it?
I was thinking, like, as soon as he found out that this could stop the spread, he should have been coughing at people. Maybe he kept, like, distance and, the mask and the proper stuff, so...
So this is an anti-vax game. So there's Gina, the scientist who is researching the parasite cell.
Yeah.
She refuses to leave the side of the immortal chimpanzee that is turning everyone into sea monsters.
Yeah.
Because the chimpanzee and her are the same. In a plot line that would later be used in Jurassic World Fallen Kingdom. But the most important character in Deep Fear is, of course, Dubois.
This is terrible! My masterpiece is ruined! Oh, what am I gonna do?
I love Dubois. His personality, his voice, his actions. He's like the resident nerd, geek, engineer in love with the underwater facility. When something crashed into it, he was like, "This is terrible! My masterpiece is ruined!" Like, he's so...
You just get the impression that whoever got the job of voicing Dubois was like, fuck it. This is going out in Japan. This isn't coming out in North America. No one's going to be, say, talking about this on the internet 26 years later.
Oh, John. You're a real man.
Like, clearly you are supposed to find Dubois, like, ridiculous and, like, lesser than John, but at the same time, I just think, like, I wish I were this cool.
John, can I push the detonator? The building is like my child. I have to do it.
Yeah, but on the story level, he's helping keep everybody alive because he has all these great ideas on how we should address all the situations. And in the end, he's like, when it's time to escape, he's like, no, I have the virus. I have to stay here. Go, escape. And he's just like, he's very selfless, you know? Unlike the main manager who's like, kill the survivors. Honestly, this needs a remake.
Like, I'm thinking about, like, what was the closest thing we got to Deep Fear 2? Like I said, Yuzo Sugano, he did do Extermination, which, like I said, is similar to Deep Fear in a lot of ways. And they did these, like, I think they were digital-only Resident Evil games called Resident Evil Revelations. One of them was set on a ship, and it had these kind of like weird, vaguely sea monster-y virus creatures on it. I mean, that's kind of Deep Fear.
You know what's a true spiritual successor to Deep Fear? Dead Space.
Yeah.
It has the monsters, it has the underlying emotional story. It does have an oxygen mechanic that's a lot more anxiety inducing.
Okay, so there's another series of games that sort of take what I was saying about what if this just didn't have weird fish zombies in it, called Septentrion. And I think there's only 2 of them, but the first one, they're both like survival adventure games set on ships. That, like, it's sort of like a game version of the Poseidon Adventure. And I remember, like, the first one's actually on the Super Nintendo. I remember because it had this really interesting, like, design to it where the whole game rotated as you played it very slowly because the ship was capsizing. So everything would start off level, and then, like, as you made progress through the game, the physical space of the game is starting to turn. And it plays vaguely like Prince of Persia, where it's that sort of like cinematic platformer thing, but in this space where everything is turning over. And that got a PlayStation 1 sequel that was called Septentrion Out of the Blue, and it's like a 3D version of the same kind of setup, where it's like you're just on a ship and the ship is sinking. Holy shit, how do we get off the ship? I feel like Deep Fear is something that, like, it actually would seriously be this, like, cult classic thing, even with the weird voice acting, because, like, Resident Evil's got weird voice acting. That doesn't mean people don't like it and think it's effective. Yeah, that's why it's so frustrating to me, because, like, it's not like this was never going to work. In conclusion, the best thing about Deep Fear is that if you go to TV tropes, people make fun of the fact that at the end of the game, John gets out of a capsule without depressurizing because that doesn't make sense.
Thank you, Sophie.
F in the chat for Dubois. F in the chat for Mookie. F in the chat for the passenger ship full of people that Clancy Dawkins murdered. It's interesting, it's fucking bizarre when they talk about it, because it's like, yeah, he did it because he thought he'd get a promotion. Like, he seems to think the Navy is just like, well, you sunk a ship. You're gonna say, well, thank you, Sophie.
Thank you, Sophie.
Thank you, Sin.
And thank you, everyone, for listening. And see y'all next time!
Until next time!